I arrived late to my daughter's wedding. I walked into the lobby and wanted to go inside. The doors were open and music floated out. I stood at the back of the room. I saw the bride and groom on the small stage. My heart felt heavy. I had come to be there. I had come to stand with her, but she had already spoken. Her last line reached me across the room. "Thank God she didn't come," she said. In a voice like a verdict. The crowd laughed. Their glasses rose. They did not know who she meant. I did. My name is Evelyn Pierce. Friends call me Eve. I am 62. My husband Martin died 3 years ago. We had been married 40 years. His death changed everything. It left me alone, in a house full of quiet. It left me with money and sorrow together. After the funeral, I tried to go on. I tried to do ordinary things again. I shop. I pay bills. I keep the house tidy. I talk on the phone to old friends. I try not to be lonely. The wedding invitation came late. It arrived at my old address, 6 weeks after it had been mailed. When I called my daughter Claire, she answered like she was busy. "Oh, Mom," she said. "I thought Ty's mother had called you. We are keeping it small, immediate family only." I said, "I am immediate family," she sighed. She did not make a place for me in the ceremony. She never asked me to help choose music. She never asked me what color I planned to wear. She did not mention walking down the aisle with me. Even as a quiet, small part of the day, I had been busy with grief. Martin had left many papers and bills and medical files. I had been trying to sort them slowly. I had been trying to make sense of the house and the life he and I shared. I thought Claire would be part of that work by my side. For years, she had been helpful. After the funeral, she had told me she would be there. She came around for short visits. She smiled and made tea. She seemed so busy with work that I let the small things go. On the wedding day, I dressed in a navy dress I had bought for the occasion. I went in through a side door. I did not want to make a scene. I wanted just to watch and be near her. The ceremony was done. Guests moved to the cocktail hour and laughed with one another. Claire stood among them in a vintage lace dress. She had taken the dress from my old closet months earlier. She said she loved the way it looked. She wore it brilliantly. Tyler, Daniel Parker, stood by her side. He looked happy. He looked kind. I had always liked him. I could have walked to her. I could have tapped her shoulder and said, "I am here." But I did not. Her voice had already made the room clear. Her toast had made an invisible line. I felt it cut between us. I left without anyone noticing. My heels clicked on the marble as I walked out alone. I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched through the window. The reception went on. Laughter rose and glasses clinked. My chest ached with a strange hot feeling. I felt invisible and furious and abandoned, all at once. I had given my life to my family. I had thought I would be present for this day. The late invitation felt like a small lie. The careful way she had excluded me looked like something planned. That night I went home to the quiet and drank a little Scotch Martin kept for holidays. I unpacked a banker's box that I had not wanted to open since his funeral. It sat in a closet for 3 years. For days, weeks, and months after the funeral, I moved around it like it was a threat. Now I set it on my dining table and sat down to look. My plan was simple. I would make sense of the papers. I would learn what Martin had left and where our accounts stood. I did not plan to wage war on my daughter. I only wanted to understand. But the first papers I pulled out changed me. They were not simply bills and notes. They were legal documents. They had her name on them in places her name should not have been. The night slipped away with me. Awake at the table, the lamp on, the papers spread like pieces of a puzzle. I feared I would not like to finish. I felt a cold calm wash through me. I would learn the truth. I would not act in anger. I would not call her names. I would be smart. I would be careful. I sat with the papers and let the sound of the street be the only other noise in the small house where I had once felt safe. I had the sense then that the life I knew was changing on a quiet, precise hinge. I could not yet see where the hinge would lead. I only knew I would walk forward to find out. The banker's box sat heavy and ordinary on my table. It smelled faintly of old paper and dust. I had delayed opening it for 3 years. Each time I thought about the box, I felt grief and fear and the dull ache of memory. Now it was time. I began with what I thought I knew. Martin's will came first. I had read it with him. Everything was to go to me. May Claire would receive some small things only after my death. That was the will I had trusted. I had believed we planned for the end together. The will felt like a soft place to land. Under the will were other papers, amendments, powers of attorney, documents with Claire's name as witness. Some were dated on days I remembered being at the hospital with Martin during his last treatments. I had been tired then. I had sat by his bed. I had held his hand while nurses changed his IV. I remembered those days. I could not imagine signing papers about my own health then, or letting someone else make choices for me. Yet the dates matched. I called Dr. Singh. He had been Martin's doctor, and now he knew me. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Iv," he said. His voice was kind. I asked him if anyone had ever told him that I might be losing my memory. He paused. "No," he said, carefully, "not to my knowledge. Martin spoke often about your steadiness. He said you kept the family life organized." I told him about the papers with Claire's name. He said he had not seen those. He sounded worried. I felt worry settle into the room like a cold draft. The signatures looked like mine on some of the documents. On others, they looked like Martin's, but altered. I was not an expert at handwriting, but I knew enough to know when something did not feel right. I made copies of the documents by taking photographs with my phone. The light in the dining room was warm. The images looked harsh on the phone screen. I felt my hands tremble, and then steady. I would not let myself be afraid without knowledge. That afternoon I called a private investigator Martin had used for a small business matter years before. His name was Frank O'Neill. He was a man who had a voice like gravel and steady hands. He asked a few short questions and then said, "Bring the documents to me. Don't tell Claire anything yet." He gave me a small recording device. "If she calls you, record the conversation," he said. "People who do this often brag when they think they're safe." I went to bed that night, with the recorder in my purse and the papers stacked on the dining room table. I slept poorly. The house seemed to hold its breath. In the brief quiet, I thought of how Martin used to examine documents with his calm face. He used to worry about small mistakes. He would have wanted me to look. He would have wanted truth rather than pretense. The next morning, Frank's office smelled like coffee and old case files. He spread my documents out on the desk and studied dates and bank transfers. He had a way of looking that made me feel like a witness in a courtroom. "This is sophisticated," he said slowly. "Your daughter knows what she is doing. She used her legal knowledge, but timing matters. The changes were made when Martin was very sick. That worries me. It could mean one of two things. Either she was trying to protect her father and acted with his consent, or she used the time when he was vulnerable to make changes for herself." We began to list what we could see. Accounts changed, beneficiaries altered, payments moved to places I did not recognize. Some transfers went to names I had not heard before. I copied each item to a new file on my laptop. I labeled the folder Martin Penn's Review. As the pages multiplied, so did my sense of a shape to this quiet mess. Evidence spoke in patterns. The pattern here suggested planning. The pattern suggested intent. I had always thought of grief as a shapeless thing. Now grief had edges. It pointed to dates and signatures and small sums that added up. It pointed to people I knew. It made me aware that the person I had trusted most could be the one who had turned the house keys a different way. I felt strange and angry, but the anger was not the loud, red kind. It was the quiet, precise kind that plans and waits. I felt a resolve I had not felt in months. I left Frank's office with his number and a small stack of copies. Frank told me to change passwords for my bank accounts. He told me to let the bank know that I might be a target for elder abuse. He told me to be careful in conversation with Claire, to record what I could, and to trust my instincts. I went home and did what he said. I changed passwords. I wrote down the dates I had found and made a timeline on the kitchen counter. Every line of the timeline felt heavy with meaning. I placed the events where the papers told me they had happened. Some dates lined up with visits Claire had made, other dates lined up with the hospital notes in Martin's file. A picture started to emerge, faint and wrong. It was the picture of someone using illness and love as cover for greed. I could not yet prove it, but I could see the outline in the papers. That night I sat at my dining table with a glass of Martin's scotch. The house was the same, but something had shifted. The small things felt different. The chair where I sat felt smaller and wiser. The papers told me there was a truth I had to speak. I had to decide how loud I would make my voice. I had to decide if I would protect what Martin had left me and find out what my daughter had done. I could not imagine the road ahead, but I knew one thing: I would walk it with my eyes open. Frank O'Neill's office smelled of old coffee and paper. He made tea and put the documents on his desk like a general reading a map. He had a small lamp that made the room feel less big. He examined each paper as if it were a clue in a long story. He tapped dates with his finger and frowned at account numbers. He had experience with fraud. He had worked on small cases like this, and big cases too. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Your daughter knows the law," he said. "She knows how to make changes look clean. That will make this harder, but not impossible." He asked me when Claire had come to the house. I told him the dates I remembered. He asked about bank names and account numbers. I did not know everything. I told him what I could, and he filled the gaps with questions that made me feel like a witness in a quiet courtroom. He told me about patterns. People who commit elder fraud often do small transfers. At first, he said, they test the water. Then they raise the stake. They use their skills and charm and the trust people give them. They slow it down so the victim does not notice at once. Then they make bigger moves when the person is weak or distracted. I thought of Martin's last months. I saw days he slept a lot, and days he was confused. I thought of Claire's presence at the hospital. I thought of her smiling and carrying the paperwork. Frank had a little recorder too. He showed me the device and told me how to use it. "If she calls," he said, "let her speak. Do not say too much. Let her show her hand." He told me to keep daily notes. He told me to make copies of every document. I did what he said. A week later I found more. A bank statement in an envelope with a hand I did not recognize. A transfer to an account overseas. A deposit to a law school loan for someone named Brian Hall. I cross-referenced notes and dates. The transfer to the overseas account happened just after a hospital visit. The law school payment matched a name I had seen in one of Claire's old case files. It made no sense to me. Why would my daughter pay a stranger's college loan? Frank said, maybe the loan was a front. Maybe it was a way to hide money. The thought made my stomach sick. The more we found, the more we understood. Claire had been moving money. She had changed beneficiaries. She had withdrawn sums that had once been for travel and comfort. Martin and I had planned to see Europe. The money for the trip was gone. The retirement fund had odd withdrawals. The checkbook had notes I did not recognize. Someone had been making a careful plan. On a rainy Tuesday, Frank asked if I had ever had conversations with Martin where he seemed worried about money. I forced myself to remember. There had been a talk one afternoon. When Martin and I sat by the back window, he said things in a half-whisper about clients who could be dishonest. He used to say that people could dress their lies in silk, and it would still be a lie. I had thought he was speaking of other people. I had not thought he might be speaking about our own daughter. That evening, I found a small sealed envelope marked in Martin's handwriting. The envelope said, "Tyler, if needed." Inside it was a small USB drive and a folded letter with Martin's clear hand. "If you are reading this," it began, "then I am not well enough to talk. There are papers and accounts I have not had the strength to organize. I am sorry. Please be careful. Claire has handled some things." I read the video file on my laptop and saw Martin's face, thin but steady. He spoke in short sentences and named dates and sums and accounts. He said he had hired a private investigator once and that he had found uncomfortable things. He said he had been worried about Claire and tried to help her get back on track quietly. He feared she might do worse and left a folder in case. His voice cut through me like a bell. Frank and I took the files and the video to a small FBI field office. Agent Morales met us. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a firm look. She listened without interrupting. She took notes and opened files on her computer. "This is serious," she said, when she had read the first pages and watched the tape. "We need copies of everything. We will coordinate this with the state bar and the U.S. attorney if it looks like embezzlement, but be careful. These cases are complicated. They take time." She told me to do something simple and surprising. She told me to carry on my ordinary life. She told me not to overact. "People who commit these crimes sometimes panic, and they make mistakes," she said. "If she knows you are watching, she might change things. Let her be. Keep going to your book club. Keep your routine. But keep records and save everything." Her words were strange comfort. It was a plan of ordinary acts. It made me feel less alone. It gave me direction. Frank began to dig. He called a forensic accountant and asked for a basic review. The accountant found the same things I had found, and a few that I had not expected. A large payment for a house down payment in Daniel's name only. Several transfers to a foreign account that bounced through intermediate banks. Small payments to a man named Brian Hall. Slowly, the story filled with more pieces. Each piece made the picture darker. The picture looked like planning and greed and careful lies. When I sat in my kitchen that night and looked at the recorder in my purse, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and satisfaction. I had loved my child and had wanted to trust her. Now I held proof that something had been wrong. My resolve was quiet but steady. I knew I would press on. I would piece together the past and protect the future. I would do it the way Martin would have done it, with care and careful steps. I closed the house quietly and slept with the lamp on for a little while. The work was only beginning. Claire suggested lunch and a message that was casual and precise. "Mom," she wrote, "Turi and I want to take you to LaRue this Thursday at 1 o'clock. We want to talk and make sure you are okay after the wedding confusion." The little green bubble on my phone felt like a test. I told Frank about the message. He said, "Say yes. Record whatever happens. Be calm." The restaurant sat near the river with big windows. The staff in dark vests moved like a quiet dance. Claire was already there when I arrived. She stood and hugged me with an actor's warmth. She wore a navy suit and a thin gold necklace. She seemed very sure of herself. Daniel sat beside her and reached for my hand. He gave me a smile that was kind and warm. I liked him. He had always been respectful. He seemed to want peace. The first minutes were easy. We exchanged small talk and ordered light salads. Claire spoke about the wedding and the tiny mix-up. She said she had wanted to keep things simple because the venue was small. She said she had wanted an intimate day, and she was sorry if we felt hurt. Her voice was smooth. She seemed to be building to something larger. After the main course arrived, she set a manila envelope between us. She slid out a few pages, as if it were simply a polite gesture. "We have been looking at the paperwork," she said quietly. "We think you might be having trouble with finances lately. We want to help." She spoke like a woman making a gentle, practical suggestion. Daniel looked at me with concern. He said, "We only want what is best for you, Mrs. Pierce." His voice was small and sweet. I spread the pages she put out. They were bank statements and a few unfiled checks. The numbers did not mean much to me at a glance, but I recognized a few names. A withdrawal here and a transfer there. Claire turned those pages like a lawyer at a desk. She pointed to a series of withdrawals and asked if I remembered them. She said, "Mom, I am worried you might be forgetting things. These are signs of memory loss. You have asked the same question many times." Her words landed like little stones. I felt them crack through my calm. I said, "I do not remember those withdrawals." She smiled and said in the kindest voice, "That is okay. We can get someone to help. There are services. We can set up a trusted person to manage funds." Daniel squeezed my hand. His eyes looked at me the way someone looks at an elder they want to protect. I felt anger rise inside me like a hot tide. It was not loud. It was careful. I had seen Claire plan in subtle ways. I had seen signatures on papers I did not sign. I had seen my bank accounts changed, In my quiet head, a list had formed of odd transfers and unexplained withdrawals. I took a breath and asked for time. "I will look into it," I said. "I want to see the full paper trail before I let anyone take control." The waiter asked if we wanted dessert. Claire said no. She had work. A brief heat of disappointment flashed across her face, but she covered it immediately. She spoke of the study she had read about early memory loss and how it sometimes starts with small things. "People don't mean harm," she said. "They just need help." She placed her hand on mine in a way I could feel was practiced. The dish felt cold. After lunch, Claire texted to say she was glad we talked. She said again she was worried for me. I walked to my car in the bright air and felt like I had walked through a glass door and it closed softly behind me. The recording sat heavy in my bag. Frank and I listened later that day. We heard the voice that arranged the plan. We heard the words that would be useful in court if needed. Frank said, "She laid out her method. She wants access. Be patient. Let her be. The more she talks, the more she will reveal." That evening, an email came from a bank alert. Someone had asked for a temporary freeze on accounts pending a review for elder financial abuse. The request came from Claire's account manager and included forms that suggested my mental state was in question. My heart sank. I called the bank, and a polite woman on the other end said they had received papers from Claire. "We only acted because a family member raised a concern," she said. "We want to be sure the customer is safe." I felt trapped. A plan that had been secret was now being turned into official paperwork. It felt like standing in a room while someone else rearranged the furniture and then accused me of not noticing. I tried to keep a calm voice when I called Frank. He said that this was a common next step in elder fraud. Plant a doubt about capacity and then use that doubt to take control. He told me to call a doctor and get an independent evaluation. "If they put a note in your medical file that you are sharp as ever, it will cut through this," he said. "Get the assessment. Prove your clarity." The small acts of ordinary life became weapons and shields. The next day I went to Dr. Singh's and asked for help. He saw me and tested me gently. He asked me to do a few tasks, to do a small memory test, and to explain accounts. I answered clearly. He wrote a letter noting my competency. He said, "Eve, you are doing well. You do not show signs of cognitive decline. You are handling complex financial questions. Keep records. We will document everything." That night, I felt a quiet winning. I had the paper that seemed like proof of who I was. But I also felt the shadow of a plan that moved through social and legal forms like smoke. Claire had changed the battlefield to places that acted like walls. I knew then that this fight would not only be in bank offices or kitchens, but in the halls of courts and in the cool, bright rooms of medical offices. I felt a deep exhaustion but also a new clarity. I would not cede my life without understanding the full story, and I would not let the woman who had called herself my daughter take my future with quiet steps. Frank and I began to dig deeper. He worked with an accountant he trusted. The accountant had a small office near the river. He ran the transactions through his software, like a miner sifts dirt for gold. He traced transfers and looked for patterns. He called once with a low voice and read a list of numbers. "This looks worse than we thought," he said. "There are transfers to shell companies and to accounts that disappear into offshore banks. It is a classic laundering structure." The numbers made my head spin. The accountant found a down payment on a house in Daniel's name only. He found law school loan payments to a man named Brian Hall that had come from accounts we controlled. He found multiple transfers on dates when Martin had been in chemo and often asleep for most of the day. The thought of those pieces placed together gave me a hollow feeling. Frank sat with me at my kitchen table and explained the picture. "She used her access, her skill, and her trust," he said. "She had legal knowledge to make papers look clean. That slowed suspicion. But patterns don't lie. We can follow the wire trail." A small sealed envelope in Martin's handwriting sat beside the laptop. The USB inside had a file labeled, "For Daniel." I had a small idea why Martin had done it. He wanted to protect his son. He wanted truth to be known. I pressed play. Martin's pale face filled the screen. He spoke with a voice worn by pain. He told dates and amounts and names. He said Claire had been taking client funds. He said she had forged signatures. He said she had manipulated him to sign documents when he was weak. He said he had been trying to protect us when he could. I took the documents and the recording to Agent Morales at the small FBI office. Her desk was neat and her manner was calm. She called an assistant and made copies of everything. "This is a federal matter," she said, after a while. "Embezzlement, wire fraud, elder abuse. These can cross state lines and involve federal statutes. We will coordinate with the state bar and other agencies." Her voice was steady. It made me feel like a small piece in a large machine that wanted to run clean. Agent Morales gave me instructions. "Document everything," she said. "Keep a journal. Note every contact you have with Claire. Keep the original paper safe, but let us make copies, and do not talk to her about the investigation." She gave me a card and said, "If she contacts you, note the time and call us right away." The months that followed were a strange blur. There were calls with investigators in suits. There were interviews and confidential meetings. Frank and the accountants worked through nights to trace transfers. Each new file pointed to other transfers. One wire led to another account that led to another law firm deposit that looked like a fee but was not. The pattern widened. Then a new discovery shocked us. The FBI search of Claire's office found ledgers and schedules. They found notebook pages that looked like plans. On them were notes about insurance policies. On them were calculations that suggested someone had considered what they would gain if certain people died. My stomach turned. I read the documents until I could not read them anymore. Agent Morales called and said, "We need to move carefully. This opens other doors. We may need to involve homicide if evidence shows foul play in Martin's death." I sat in my small kitchen and tried to contain a wave of heat that rose in my chest. The thought that my husband might have been harmed to hide crime felt like a new, brutal loss. It was as if the ground under my feet had shifted and swallowed the day my husband had died and left only questions. The FBI obtained search warrants, and the news began to leak. A reporter called with questions. I said nothing. We let the teams work quietly. They searched Claire's home and office. They found a safe behind a painting in her home. The safe contained forged insurance policies and bank ledgers, and a private notebook with notes on drugs and their effects on the elderly. The list made my hands go cold. A few days later, Agent Morales called and said they had enough for arrests on financial charges. "We still need to work on the medical side," she said. "But the financial evidence is strong." My life felt like a string that had been cut. The sound of the string being cut was the silence of ordinary days after that. When the agents arrested Claire, I watched from a distance. They took her in handcuffs. She argued and called her lawyer's name with the practiced voice of someone who had managed arguments for years. The local news ran pieces about the arrest. People came to the house with questions. Some offered support, some with pointed looks. Daniel stood beside me as the world I knew seemed to crack open. The FBI held files and pourings of numbers that made sense like a slow river map. Each recovered dollar told a story. The government froze and seized accounts. Restitution was arranged in principle. The counting took time. The legal engines turned slowly. In the quiet moments between calls, I would take Martin's old records and look at them like maps of a life we thought we had. He had tried to protect us in his own quiet way. He had left truths in neat packages like gifts. I smiled at the memory and cried at the files. The path forward was long. Many victims came forward. Many names and faces appeared in the accountant's files. The case was bigger than I first believed. Through it all, Agent Morales called when she could. She was gentle in tone and firm in action. "This will take time," she said, on one call that arrived like rain in dry weather. "We will get answers. We will follow the money. We will look into the medical questions. Stay close to Daniel and keep the records. The truth will help you. It will also help others." I looked at the collection of papers and felt both dread and a nearly new steadiness. The uncovering of truth was slow and hard. It left me tired but strangely sure. I had been wrong to wait in silence about my doubts. Now I was speaking, and the words had weight. The law around us moved like slow water, but it moved with force. In the end, the truth mattered. It was the lamp that showed the map. After the arrest, Claire's anger shifted like weather. At first she was quiet behind her lawyer's door. Then she began to call people. The calls spread rumors. She spoke to neighbors and colleagues. She told them I was unwell and confused. She told them I was making false accusations. The calls felt like a storm. People I had known for years began to ask questions with a new tone. One morning Claire showed up at my door at 7 a.m. She did not knock gently. She let herself in as if a place belonged to her. "You vindictive old woman," she said. The second she saw me, there was something raw and bitter behind her words. I was taken off guard for a moment, but then I remembered the small details and the papers that had given me the map of her moves. "Claire," I said, calm as I could be, "sit down, tell me why you are here." She sat with a look of a person who thought they had a right to the room. She said Daniel had left her, that he had taken half their things and hired a lawyer. The news came like a small thunderclap. I felt both sorrow and a steady sense that the truth had found him too. She accused me of ruining her life. "You took everything," she said. "You wrecked my marriage. You turned Daniel against me." I stayed quiet. I let her speak and watched the way she used rage as a shield. I had seen that shield before. I had seen it when she was a child, and when she was a young lawyer. It was practiced. She told me to withdraw the complaints. She said she would make me comfortable if I signed over power to her. She said she would make the troubles go away. Her face changed when she mentioned doctors and experts who would say I had dementia. She spoke of a plan to have me declared incompetent. "You will be in a home," she said, as if it were a guarantee of safety and not a threat. She said she would make sure I had someone to manage my affairs so that I would not make mistakes. The bank called soon after with formal notice. Claire had filed a request to flag my accounts for review. I could not access my money. That small, sharp loss made the threat immediate. I called Frank and Agent Morales and told them. Frank told me to get a doctor's evaluation quickly. Agent Morales said to get a lawyer and keep a record of everything. She is using forms of legal pressure that abusers use. Agent Morales said, "It is a strategy to isolate the victim and take control." Adult Protective Services called and sent a worker named Janet. She came to the house and walked through my rooms with the faint, tired patience of someone who had seen many family stories. She asked me about my days and how I managed my money. She saw my neat, clean house and the notes and files and the letters Martin had left. She listened and she wrote down the facts. "This looks like retaliatory action," she said, "but I will complete the assessment. You have been organized and independent." That day, the world felt split into two halves. One half held the quiet routines of my life, tea with neighbors, a book club call, the mail arriving. The other half held sudden phone calls, accusations, and legal papers. The two halves did not feel like the same life. I felt small in the middle of something large, like a paper boat in a wide river. But I also felt a fierce steadiness. I had a file with Martin's notes. I had the FBI and an attorney. I had the quiet proof of my ability to manage my affairs. Claire threatened again, this time in words sharp and precise. "Sign over your power to me," she said on the phone, "or I will make sure everyone thinks you are not fit." I recorded the conversation and sent it to Agent Morales. "This is witness intimidation and abuse of process," she said. "We will add it to the file. Do not respond directly to her." The pressure increased. Claire called neighbors and friends and told stories about my memory and my behavior. People began to treat me with a softer, more careful voice when they spoke. It felt like the world was balancing on rumor. Daniel, however, told people his side. He shared the video and the documents. He told a different story, with the slow sadness of a man who thought he had been tricked by a loved one. Many who heard both sides found the evidence persuasive. Others remained confused. As the legal process moved, Claire used everything she had at her disposal. She filed papers. She hired a lawyer. She spoke to colleagues at the law firm. and used her reputation as armor. The state bar began to receive complaints from clients who said they had been wronged. The list grew. The local news began to pick up small pieces. The story that had started at my dining table started to bloom like a strange, fierce flower in the public light. One night Claire came to my house, not to yell but to bargain. She said she could make things easy. She wanted me to agree to sign a statement that would show she had only acted to help me and that her access had been authorized. She said she would make restitution and that there would be no need for a public trial. It was an offer wrapped with heat. She had belief in her own script and expected me to play my part. "I can make this go away," she said calmly. "We can avoid ruin." I looked at her across the kitchen counter and thought about Martin's letter and his face on the video telling Daniel the truth. I thought of the people who had lost money to Claire's schemes. I thought of the envelopes and the transfers and the quiet way she had worked. I felt like I had a long, thin rope and she had come to the other end and expected me to let go. "No," I said. "We will let the investigators do their job. I will not sign anything to make this go away. Justice matters more than a quiet bargain." Her face darkened and she left. The next day she filed a formal petition asking the court to order a competency evaluation. The clocks seemed to speed and slow all at once. I felt like a person in the middle of a courtroom drama where her voice was loud and mine had to be careful and clear. Through the tension and the humiliation and the stress, I did something I had not done in months. I went to the small garden in the back and planted a spring bulb. I put soil around it and pressed it down with my palms. The small act was an anchor. While the legal battle made big, empty rooms feel like battlefields, the small garden reminded me of life that continued. I breathed and felt the earth give under my fingers. I made my little plan: keep records, lean on Daniel and friends, and let the law move slowly and surely. For now, it was the best plan I had. The call from Agent Morales came on a bright morning. Her voice was steady but quiet. "We have more forensics coming in," she said. "I need you to come to the field office." My heart beat a little faster, and then a steady, cold feeling washed through me. I knew what it might mean. The agents had found more than bank transfers and ledgers. They had found notes about policies and drugs. They had found a ledger that looked like planning. My hands grew still. At the field office, Detective Reyes and a medical investigator sat at a long table and placed files in front of me. The papers were clinical and strange. They showed an outline of Martin's last weeks. They pointed to changes in his condition that did not match the cancer progression recorded in his medical chart. There were notes about heart irregularities and the sudden worsening of symptoms after a series of medications had been adjusted. The investigators were careful but clear. "We need to exhume the body," Detective Reyes said. "We need a more complete toxicology. Modern tests can find toxins that were not included in the original exam." The idea of disturbing Martin's grave felt like a knife. It felt wrong in 1,000 small ways, but I also wanted truth. If someone had done something to him, I wanted to know. I wanted him to be honored by honesty. I agreed. The county approved the exhumation. The day it happened, I stood apart from the small gathering and watched the men in gloves carry a sealed container away. It felt like the turning of a page in a book that had been kept closed for too long. The toxicology results came weeks later. They were careful to use words that tried to hold back shock. The lab found a level of digitalis, a medication that affects the heart, at higher than therapeutic levels. The pathologist said it could have worsened heart conditions and contributed to the speed of his decline. The news hollowed out the space where I had been holding grief, like a smooth stone. It cracked open into something harder. Agent Morales moved methodically after that. She obtained search warrants, and agents went to Claire's house, to her office, and to places connected with shell accounts. They brought back boxes of papers. The notebooks had things scrawled in neat handwriting. On the pages were lists of policy numbers, notes on drug interactions, and calculations that read like what-ifs. Some pages had dates next to items that matched dates when transfers were made. Each page read colder than the last. When they arrested Claire, it was early. Agents surrounded her home before she left for work. She was handcuffed and read her rights on the driveway. The neighbors came with their phones and recorded the scene. A small crowd gathered and murmured. She argued with the agents and made the practiced legal calls. Her face was the same cool face she had always worn in court. She said nothing to me when she was let in. The charges that appeared in the indictment were long and hard to read: embezzlement, wire fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and later counts related to the death of Martin. The local news covered it like a storm. The law firm she worked for issued a statement that they were cooperating and were stunned. Clients called police to give statements about missing funds and altered settlements. The list of victims grew. Some lost thousands, others lost tens of thousands. The state bar moved quickly to suspend her license, pending investigation. Daniel came to me at the house the night after the arrest. He sat with his face in his hands for a long time. "I can't believe it," he said finally. "I married her. I thought I knew her." He had a vacant, shocked look that I could not do much for. He held the USB drive that Martin had left and watched the tape again. I sat with him and listened. I offered food and a hand to hold. The court process moved at its own pace. The prosecution built a case that they said was clear. The defense filed motions and hired experts. The first appearance in court had clothes too neat for grief and a room full of reporters. I sat near the back with a small notebook and wrote down what was said. The judge set bail at first for financial matters, but because of flight risk and the possible danger, Claire was kept. There were nights I woke up and felt the dark sweep of the old life come back like water. There were other nights I felt a small new light in the form of relief. The police had found many of the missing funds. Banks had frozen accounts, and the government started the process of restitution. The forensic accountants worked with agents to trace funds. It was slow and painstaking, but bit by bit, more money was recovered. The federal case meant there was a strong team working to turn the mess into order. At times the weight of public attention felt heavy. Strangers asked me questions on the street. People judged before knowing the facts. There were bad days and good days, but there were also moments of tenderness. A neighbor brought over soup and said, "If you need someone to come by, call me." Daniel called every evening to check in. Frank was at my side often, the way a steady friend stands through a storm. Agent Morales called and told me of new developments. "We are following leads," she said. "We are making progress." When the trial finally started, the prosecution laid out a slow narrative of transfers and lies. The evidence included bank records, client statements, and forensics. The defense tried to show a woman in stress who made mistakes. The voices in the room played a long game of truth. In the end, evidence and testimony pointed toward the same pattern: planned moves, forged signatures, and the manipulation of trust. The questions about Martin's death moved to the front. The prosecution presented the toxicology and the notes. The medical experts were clear in their phrases like dangerous levels and contribution to death. The defense questioned timing and intent. The courtroom felt like a balance of two very different worlds. Through it all, I lived day by day. I kept Martin's photo on the mantle. I wrote small notes to myself and to Daniel about things that mattered. I walked in the park and watched leaves fall. Those small acts of living felt like anchors in the long trial. The truth had been uncovered piece by piece. The law had moved slowly but with force. It found the outlines of a crime that had been shrouded for years. The sentence was held in a large courtroom. The air felt heavy and quiet. I sat beside Daniel and watched the judge speak. The evidence had been long and careful. It had been a map of wire transfers and files and toxicology results and ledgers. It had been a story told in many small papers that together made a large picture. The judge read the verdict, and the crowd in the room was silent. Claire stood expressionless as the reading continued. The judge spoke of trust betrayed and lives harmed. He spoke of clients who had been robbed of savings and of a family turned to ruin. The sentence was long. The judge said it was meant to match the harm done. When he finished, the sound of metal on court steps felt like a final movement. Claire was led away in cuffs. The world outside the court seemed to breathe. After the sentence, life slowly returned to the shape it had been before the storm. There was no pretending. The legal process had cleared some things and complicated others. Most of the stolen money was recovered. The government and the client protection funds returned much to those who had lost it. The court ordered restitution and asset forfeiture. By the end of the civil matters, I learned the government had recovered about 80% of what had been taken. It was a relief. It was not everything, but it was a righting. Daniel and I took cautious steps forward. He moved out of the house he had shared with Claire and toward a life without her. He soothed clients who had been affected by the scandal and tried to rebuild trust. He took time to grieve and to think. He called me often and told me we would take small trips and that we would put things right. He found a new partner months later, a gentle woman who had been by his side. They were kind to me and included me in their life. They asked me to the new wedding, and I agreed. I felt a warmth in my chest that was not guilt, but a small, steady hope. I made a small, bold decision for myself. I had always wanted to see the old churches of Europe with Martin. We had talked of Florence and Rome and the west coasts of old cities. With some of the recovered funds and the small insurance return, I booked a trip. I prepared slowly and carefully. I told myself I would go for Martin and for the life he wanted us to have. I stood on a windy morning at the Trevi Fountain and threw a coin. I made a small wish for new beginnings. I felt the ancient stone and the water and a lightness I had not felt in years. The postcards I sent from Rome were small and bright. Daniel wrote back with messages of care, throwing coins and making wishes for real new beginnings. I wrote on one. He wrote back, "You mean the world to me." Those words were like a small lamp. They warmed something inside me. When I came back, life felt both familiar and new. I did not pretend the past was simple. I had lost a daughter in a way that cannot be rescued, but I had not lost the capacity to love others or to make a new life. I had new friends and allies, and a son-in-law who had proved his character in ways that mattered most. The house still held Martin's things. I kept a small box of his letters and a scarf he loved. On quiet afternoons, I would sit in his chair and read his words. I would say his name aloud and remember the good parts. The memory felt less like a chain and more like a map. I would take a step and choose another small thing to do. At times, I would think of Claire and feel a small coldness. I thought of why she had chosen greed over family and why she had chosen to harm. I thought of how people sometimes wrap terrible acts in ordinary clothes. I thought of the threads that had been pulled so tight they could not be fixed. But sometimes I also thought of how many people had been kind. I thought of the FBI agents who had listened, of Frank who had helped me, of Agent Morales' steady calls, and of friends who brought soup. I thought of Daniel's quiet strength. Years after the trial, the newspaper stories would lie in a drawer and become part of the archive of a life. People would ask me now and then how I had survived it. I would tell them two things. First, keep records and speak up. Second, small acts matter. Plant a bulb, keep a journal, call a friend. The small acts will steady you. One cool afternoon in the garden, I planted another bulb. It was spring again. The soil felt familiar now. I pressed the bulb in the ground and covered it gently. I thought of the life Martin had wanted for us, and the truth he had tried to protect. I thought of the simple opening of a box of papers that had set everything in motion. I thought of the long, slow work of law and the hands that had helped. I felt tired and quiet, and in a new way, free. I wrote a small letter to the world in my head and tucked it away. Protect those you love and keep the records you need. I told myself, travel and read and plant bulbs. Live the life you choose. Then I went inside and made tea and sat down with the book Martin loved. The house felt full with small, honest things. It felt at last like a home again.